Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, February the 4th, 2025. Today I want to talk about sanctions and Canada and the United States and the global economy and the fact that Jupiter is going stationary direct. But before I talk about all of this, and it may be a little bit over my head, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, February the 4th, 2025. And usual reminder, if you like and subscribe, I'd be very grateful. And so let's look at what's going on today. So here is the chart for noon, and you can see that at noon today, February the 4th, 2025, Tuesday, set for New York, the moon is at 7 degrees Taurus. So 7 degrees Taurus. So it's going to be in Taurus for everyone, and that means again I was going to say have nothing in fire, but actually something has gone into fire. The Venus has gone into fire signs. So just because the moon has out of Aries, we lose some fire, but we also gain some fire because of Venus taking the moon's place as that key planet in Aries. But with the moon in Taurus, it's a time when things might feel as if they're stabilizing a bit. I mean, I know that things are happening in the global economy and things might seem very unstable if you look at what's happening in the world, but we have to look at our own lives and what we can do around us. And with the moon in Taurus, it is a time for creating some stability, if at all possible. And, it can be hard work, but I do think that it is actually possible. And the moon, by the way, goes into Taurus at 3:33 a.m. London time. So that means that it went into Taurus last night if you're in the Americas. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, it will go into Taurus this afternoon. Now, that is not the only thing going on, the moon moving into Taurus. We also have Venus going into Aries. Now, I think in tomorrow's video, I'm going to sort of go into detail about Venus in Aries, but Venus moving into Aries, it's important. What's kind of interesting about Venus moving into Aries is that on paper, Venus has a dramatic fall in terms of its essential dignities. Venus in Pisces was in its exaltation, and in Aries it's in its detriment. So Venus's position, at least on the surface, completely collapses. Yet you could say that the last few degrees of Pisces were not actually particularly fortunate, because you had Neptune in late Pisces, so Venus was making a conjunction to Neptune, very confusing influence. Plus, you've got the fixed star Skeet, the star often connected with accidents and disasters and so on, particularly shipwrecks. I don't think there have been any shipwrecks to my knowledge recently or over the last couple of days, but Venus is out of there, so it's not quite as bad as it looks. And still, Venus in Aries can be about inappropriate behavior in terms of relationships, perhaps being too forward, someone else being too forward, jumping into things, not sufficiently understanding what's going on an emotional level. And I mean, Venus is also the planet of art. You could say Venus in Aries is bad art. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I mean, in isolation, I'm sure it needn't be bad art, but you could say that it's bad art, but bad art aggressively put forward. And that links with the fact that Venus is on the Aries point. So let me just turn my phone off. Sorry about that. But Venus is on the Aries point. So Venus on the Aries point, it's the world point. So the Venus principle is all around us, but how are we actually seeing that Venus principle? We look around us perhaps and we see tastelessness, things that just look out of place, crude, just it doesn't look very nice. So that might be one way in which we perceive Venus moving into Aries. And Venus, I suppose, could also be connected with plastic surgery, cosmetics. Well, cosmetic surgery, not plastic surgery that is needed, necessary after an accident or whatever, but cosmetic surgery, elected surgery. If you have plastic surgery with Venus in Aries in this position, is it going to work well? Well, it might. But all things being equal, you should probably wait. If you're planning on having plastic surgery, might be a good idea to wait until Venus is in a slightly better position. And that might come when the sun moves into Pisces. So, when the sun moves into Pisces, that means that the sun will be in Venus's exaltation, and Venus will be in the sun's exaltation. So the sun and Venus will be in mutual reception. So some relief is at hand for Venus. But right now, Venus isn't in a great position. I wouldn't have said it was in a disastrous position. It's not making any bad aspects, but Venus in Aries is, it could be better. And then we have Jupiter going stationary direct. So today, Jupiter comes to a standstill, and then it starts to move direct. And this is something I will be talking about later in the video. And if you want some precision on that, the precise time at which Jupiter comes to a standstill is 9:40 a.m. today, February the 4th, London time. So that's going to be 4:40 a.m. New York, 1:40 a.m. in sort of California or British Columbia, and it will be very late last night if you're in Hawaii, for example. And so stationary direct, I do feel that this is important. And for many of us, there may just be a feeling that things are just kind of returning to normal a little bit, although the exact point of station, when Jupiter is absolutely still like it is now, might bring its own stresses. And later in the video, I'm going to look in detail, at Jupiter stationing, and I do think it might have some impact on the global economy. And anything else? Mercury semi-square Neptune. So Mercury at 12:38 Aquarius, Neptune at 28:5 Pisces. So there's a 45-degree aspect between Mercury and Neptune. 45-degree aspect can represent getting the wrong idea about things, or it could be about deception. And we do need to check our facts with Mercury making a semi-square to Neptune, and so there is a negative side to it. Mercury semi-square Neptune can also be deceptive. It can be people being deceptive to us. It can also be people, it can be our own victims. We can be deceptive. We can tell lies. Is that a good idea with Mercury semi-square Neptune? I don't think so. I think it's quite likely if we tell lies, but we might just get caught up in them. And so let's just quickly look at the picture for Sydney, Australia. And so this is moon at 7 degrees Taurus at midday New York. From a perspective of Sydney, Australia, the moon is at 28 Aries. So if you are in Australasia, then the first part of the day, the moon will actually be in Aries. And so you're not going to experience Moon in Taurus until this afternoon, but it's not so long to wait. So there's a slight difference there between Australia and New Zealand. Sorry, between Australasia and the rest of the world. And then there's the heliocentric view. Now, I will be returning to the heliocentric chart because the heliocentric chart says so much about the economy and the markets. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm able to utilize the heliocentric chart as well as astrologers who completely specialize in financial astrology. If you are specializing in financial astrology, I assume you're using heliocentric astrology. I mean, because heliocentric astrology is really critical if you're trying to work out sort of economic cycles, and it's not something I obsess about. But here is the heliocentric picture with the sun in the center of the solar system, and Mercury is opposition Mars, and it's also conjunct Pluto. And so with Mercury opposition Mars, as I think I was saying yesterday, it's a lot of words. And when you think about what's happening with Trump and Mexico and what Trudeau is saying, and Trump saying he's going to sanction Canada and Canada's going to sanction America back, and what's her name, Chrystia Freeland suggesting there's going to be a 100% tariff, thinking it might be a good idea to have a 100% tariff on Teslas. This is all Mercury opposition Mars, and there's a lot to say. People are making threats, making things, saying big things, big statements. Are they prepared to back them up with action? Who knows? But that's a general environment, with Mercury making the conjunction to Pluto and making an opposition Mars. And I will be returning to this heliocentric chart later in the video. And what I want to just do now is consider the astrology for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, February the 4th, 2025. Aries, Venus is moving into your sign, and this movement is something which I think you're going to appreciate. Now, I've said earlier in this video that Venus doesn't work particularly well in Aries, that Venus is in its detriment in this sign, and that is certainly true. But Venus is still a benefic, and it represents things working well, all things being equal. At the same time, Venus is in a fire sign. It's in your sign. And even though Venus is in its detriment in Aries, it helps you come alive. In a way, it doesn't really matter the fact it's Venus. It could be Mercury, it could be the Sun, it could be Moon, but in this case it's Venus. It's just a personal planet moving into Aries at a time when there aren't any other personal planets in Aries. Okay, you've got perhaps Moon in just leaving Aries if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but still having Venus here really does help. It provides that all-important fire. And for an Aries, that really matters. And Aries is, it's also about how you present yourself. And, with Venus in Aries, you're able to relate. And it's going to be important for you to relate. And many people are going to regard you as being relatable. They're going to want to be close to you. I mean, why not? You are in many respects where the action is, so it's a natural force of nature that people are going to want to come your way, because you've got that spark. You do have that sense of initiative, and it might not always be very smooth, it might even be a little bit crude, but still it's actually there. And so in terms of relationships, I do think that there is a lot to work with. And so relationships can certainly function well. I mean, I'm not saying they will function well. You could say, well, Venus is making an opposition with true Black Moon Lilith. And so with Venus in Aries making an opposition to true Black Moon Lilith, that might say something about other people. It may say something about what other people are experiencing. And also Venus is in Aries. Venus is not particularly well placed in Aries. So some of the people you have to deal with may not be on very good form. And you have to be patient with them. Aries can be impatient with certain people. They can want things to happen, and they can want other people to respond, and they can get irritated when they don't. And if other people are sort of weak or feeling sorry for themselves, sometimes you may not be entirely sympathetic with that. Yet you are quite capable of being sympathetic, because Mars is making a square to Chiron. Now, I should have mentioned that Mars square Chiron in the introduction, but I forgot. I wrote it down, but I forgot to talk about it. But Mars, your ruler, like yesterday, is square Chiron. And so with Mars square Chiron, you do actually have the capacity to care, and you can really tune into what's bothering people. And if someone is being treated badly, you do actually have the capacity to really get quite angry about it. I mean, that is one way of looking at Mars square Chiron. Another way of looking at Mars square Chiron is to say, well, Chiron is in Aries. It's been in your sign for some time. Mars is square Chiron, and so you might say, well, it's a time when you need to be different, if you take the view that Chiron is the maverick, wanting to do something that other people don't expect. And I think that is certainly something you can do. But with Venus moving into Aries, it's just possible that your taste and your sense of decorum may not be 100%. So you might mean well, you might be doing things which you know are right, but the way you present things just may be a little bit clumsy. Yeah, it might be crude, it might not be pretty, perhaps, and it could be that that's the right approach. It gets people's attention, but not always. So do consider the way you assert yourself. There are many ways of asserting yourself, and you don't always have to do it in such a way that puts people off. You could do that. I mean, it is possible. It's unnecessary, though, because fundamentally you are where the action is, and I think most people really will appreciate that. Taurus. Moon is now moving into your sign. Okay, it might be this afternoon if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but it's getting there. And so Moon moving into Taurus, you do feel a sense of your own power, especially as the Moon is making a square to Pluto. Moon square Pluto is a reminder of your ambitions and what you want to achieve and what you want to change. And you're going to be very insistent about it. And once you've decided that something needs to be done, then chances are you're going to want to really go for it. And you're going to be stubborn, and you're going to be pretty persistent, and once you start throwing your energy into something, you possibly won't know when to stop. You'll just keep going. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You certainly have a lot of energy, but there is the question about where you are directing that energy and whether or not that energy is getting scattered, or you're putting this energy into the wrong areas, you're getting involved in a conflict which is unnecessary. So do think about focus. If you've got energy and it's getting out of control, well, that's not something you want. But you need to concentrate on things that are relevant and things that you can handle. And don't be too impulsive. And consider how you are seen. And this relates to Venus moving out of Pisces into Aries. So Venus moving into Aries, from a Taurean view, gives us a very mixed message. Venus is how you express yourself. It's been in Pisces over the last couple of days, moving through late Pisces. The last couple of days, although Venus is exalted in Pisces, may not have been great, because Venus, your ruler, was conjunct Skeet, the fixed star connected with accidents and disasters. I'm not saying you had an accident or a disaster. It just might have felt that things were a little bit on the brink, especially as Venus was conjunct Neptune. And then Venus moving into Aries, there's a little bit of relief about that sign change. But Venus in Aries is not the greatest sign for Venus to be in. Venus is in its detriment in Aries, because Venus rules Libra, so in Aries it's in its detriment. So it's not great. And also from a Taurean perspective, when Venus moves into Aries, it's possibly a time when there are just some things that need to be kept to yourself. You want to talk about them, you want to express them, because it seems to be the right thing to do, particularly with Moon square Pluto. Let's get things going. But some things are best kept to yourself. If you were to just sort of reveal them and just tell people what you really felt, and you were quite pushy about it, you might create the wrong impression. So, Taurus, be very careful what you reveal. You do not have to reveal everything, and if you're in doubt, then it's probably best if you hold off. And it just may be that you can do some of your best work, when you're alone. You may not want to be alone, but it's where you can do your best work, and you don't have to be in the public eye all the time. So a bit of refinement, Taurus, would be a very good idea. And you need to make a clear distinction between your public life and your private life. There are some things that do have to be done in public, but a lot of things that are best done in your own private way, without other people interfering. Seeing a half-finished product, that's absolutely not what they want to do. There is some danger of that. You work on something, it's half-finished, it doesn't look great, people see it, they criticize it, or they respond badly to it, but it's not finished. It's not finished. And so Taurus, before you reveal too much, just make sure that it's all in order. And it's not all in order at the moment. Give it some time. Gemini. Mercury is doing some stuff, and Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is making two aspects. Mercury is making a decile to Saturn, and it's making a semi-square to Neptune. And in fact, from a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is making an opposition to Mars. So Mercury is quite busy, and I think that you should try to be concentrating on that Mercury decile Saturn. might sound a little bit obscure, but Mercury decal Saturn is about you trying to get yourself together. You have a vision of order, things running smoothly, you being in control, but it's just a vision. I mean, it may even be a fantasy. And the reality might be much less than perfect. You are aware of the chaos around you. If you were to have my eyes, and if you were to see what I am seeing, me being, of course, having my sun in Gemini, I'm sure you'd be appalled. Because I've got this darkness around me, which I do need to change, but the darkness does conceal so much. It conceals that chaos. And with Mercury decal Saturn, you have this endearing fantasy of order. And is it going to remain a fantasy, or can you actually turn it into something real? Well, Gemini, you can certainly sort it out. Again, I'm being a hypocrite. What does it say? Don't talk about the speck in another person's eye when you haven't resolved the plank in your own. Isn't that what the Bible says? And there's a huge plank in my eyes, so I'm being a bit hypocritical here. But Gemini, there are things you can sort out. You can sort them out, and you certainly have the fantasy that you can do it, and you can actually turn that into reality. It can happen with that Mercury decal Saturn, and ideally you want to avoid the worst excesses of that Mercury semi-square Neptune. Now, Mercury semi-square Neptune is not a well-ordered aspect. It's an aspect that can go all over the place. Neptune can be the planet of dissolution and chaos, boundaries slipping, not knowing what's going on, believing one's own lies, and believing other people's lies at worst. And so perhaps, Gemini, with that Mercury semi-square Neptune, you just have to be aware of your own capacity to be hopelessly confused, and for you to be surrounded even by a hopeless mess. I mean, not hopeless, because nothing's hopeless. And you need to bring that in. Although, if I want to say anything positive about Mercury semi-square Neptune, it does make you sensitive. It makes you sensitive to other people's feelings. It might even have a spiritual dimension, being aware of something higher than yourself. But 9 times out of 10, I think that Mercury semi-square Neptune is going to be a bit of a problem. And fortunately, you've got Mercury decal Saturn to really try to get it together. And heliocentrically, Mercury opposition Mars. I took the view that heliocentric Mercury opposition Mars is going to be more about what's happening on a global level. It's not very personal, that aspect. It's about, for example, Trump making threats, statements, or it may not be Trump or Trudeau or the president of Mexico or somewhere else. There's always someone saying something threatening or something ill-advised. And it needn't be you. It could be you, though. Mercury opposition Mars might encourage you to say things that you don't really mean. They're somewhat exaggerated, or you might respond to pressure in a way that could be unfortunate. So, you and this heliocentric Mercury Mars, you're dealing with a complicated world. How do you respond? You want to say something and you just say the first thing that comes to mind, and maybe that was the wrong thing to say. And while all of this is going on, Jupiter's going stationary direct. And Jupiter moving direct, it's in your sign. And Jupiter's going stationary direct gives you an opportunity to start to take a little bit of control. Maybe not today, but it's a process of improvement. And Mercury is trine Jupiter, and I talked about that yesterday. I believe that this Mercury trine Jupiter is a really good aspect, It's good for relationships. It allows you and other people to see eye to eye and get on with each other, perhaps form new relationships, strengthen existing ones. And with Jupiter moving stationary direct, it might feel that, okay, again, maybe not today, but over the next few days, it may feel that something you abandoned, something you were kind of working on maybe last summer, something you had an idea last summer or over the autumn, and you abandon it, and you may feel at the moment that you had this vision, but this vision has kind of gone off course. But now with Jupiter going direct, you can bring this vision back into focus, and it can happen, and you want it to happen. Many Geminis are in the mood for action now, and you feel there's no time to waste. Let's get going on it. But there's no need to be in a hurry. Remember, Mercury is semi-square Neptune. There is a possibility of making mistakes, short-term mistakes, getting the wrong impression. So just give it a little bit of time. But over the next few days, few weeks, as Jupiter gets itself together, then you will be able to get yourself together. And at the moment, with that Mercury trine Jupiter, with those Aquarius planets, with the Sun, Mercury in Aquarius, it is a good time for Geminis, broadly speaking. It's just that today there are a few things that you do have to be aware of that do need your attention. And if you can be focused and disciplined, Gemini, I think that would really help. Cancer. Mars is square Chiron. Mars was square Chiron yesterday, and this Mars square Chiron, it's exact, and as far as I'm concerned, this square between Mars and Chiron does give you strength, and it gives you power, and it may even give you moral authority. Mars might be going retrograde, but it's moving through Cancer, and moving through Cancer, it's very motivated, and some of your initiatives might not always work out because Mars is going retrograde. But with Mars square Chiron, and Chiron being in Aries, you do feel that you want to stand out. You might not want to stand out, actually, on a conscious level, but unconsciously, I think you actually do. You maybe even need to stand out because you have got something to offer and something to contribute, and I don't think it's really a time to be keeping things to yourself. And it may be you have to do something that really grabs people's attention. They don't want to see it, they don't want to hear it, but it's something you have to deliver, because things aren't going to happen if you say nothing. And sometimes you just have to take the first step. And while this is happening, Venus is moving into Aries. And Venus moving into Aries, as far as I'm concerned, is something fortunate. It doesn't matter too much that Venus is in its detriment in Aries. The point is that Venus, which is a benefic, is moving into an important angle in your chart. And when Venus moves into Aries, because it is, if you like, the career, status, attention, ego sector of your chart, it can be the looking in the mirror configuration, or the movement that makes you aware of how you come across. So you might become, with Venus moving into Aries, a little more self-conscious than usual. You might spend a little more time than usual looking in the mirror and thinking about your appearance and how you come across, and that's fine, provided you don't get too obsessed about it. And I suppose in certain cases, not many cases, Venus moving into Aries for you, there could be a touch of vanity. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate it, but I mean, vanity, everyone is vain at some level, but maybe it's okay to be a little bit vain, but don't be too vain. Too much vanity could be a problem, but I don't really want to overstate that. I'm talking about a small minority of Cancerians might have a touch of vanity with Venus moving into Aries, but by and large, Venus moving into Aries is good. It does actually make you more attractive. It makes you come over in a way that is appealing. And if you're trying to do something, get something done, then the way you come across, the way you look, maybe the things you wear, that kind of thing. I mean, not that I know much about anything about that, but I think I get the symbolism that the things you wear, the way you look, is going to make a difference. So if you're going to a meeting, or you're trying to persuade someone to do something, what you look like could make a difference with Venus moving into Aries. And in general, it does allow you to be more sociable, and it's not really a time, Cancer, to be shy. And we have Moon moving into Taurus as well. So Moon moving into Taurus does allow you to be sociable. It makes it easy to get people onto your side, and it's also quite grounding. If other people don't really know what's going on, it's a question of Cancer coming in, settling everyone down, telling them that everything's fine. There's something actually quite reassuring about your influence, and it can be reassuring. I mean, it's in a way it's up to you, because we've got to balance Moon in Taurus, that stabilizing influence, with the fact that Mars is square Chiron. You can actually be very unsettling if you want to be, but it's your choice. Sometimes you have to be unsettling, and it just may be something specific. You have to shake things up a little with Mars square Chiron, because it's important that people understand something, and they need to understand that your way is the right way, for example, and you certainly don't want to be taken for granted. So you have a great deal of choice there. And if we look at the day in general, I think it's a day when you do need to push yourself, and you shouldn't be afraid of putting your head above the parapet, because you've definitely got something to contribute. Leo, the Moon is moving into Taurus, and so with Moon moving into Taurus, it is likely to be a time when you feel that you've got to be seen and heard, and if you've got any ambitions with Moon moving into Taurus, you're probably going to want to get going on them as soon as possible. You're also aware of what might be holding you back. You certainly feel that something is holding you back, but you have to ask yourself, is it a figment of your imagination? Perhaps you're imagining it. Or maybe, Leo, you're giving someone more power than they actually deserve, or rather you're imagining that someone has more power than they actually have. So don't exaggerate, and don't use an exaggerated view of someone else's strength as a way to excuse yourself for doing nothing. whatever is in your way, I do think that it can actually be resolved, and it's important that you don't have a negative view. And you could have a negative view. That is possible. You might have all sorts of thoughts about what other people are capable of doing, or what other entities are capable of doing. And Leo, there's a certain tendency to think the worst of people, and to think that people are literally up to no good, and that they're almost sort of conspiring to bring you down. And I'm not trying to make you paranoid, by the way. I'm just looking at things from the worst possible perspective. And if you find yourself having suspicious thoughts, then ask yourself, are you being realistic? Because there is a sense in which you might see things in the worst possible light, and that's not something we want to happen. And instead, Leo, you do have to make the effort to understand what is happening. Don't jump to conclusions. Observe people, listen to what they're saying. Keep listening. And if you keep listening for long enough, you might start to develop an understanding of the way things are going, the way things are unfolding, and you might realize that things aren't as bad as they seem. And besides, Leo, if you make a special effort to be really positive, make a special effort. I mean, it may require a supreme effort, but if you can make that effort, then I do think that in the end you're going to make progress, and you're going to make the links that need to be made, and you'll realize that things actually aren't so bad, and and then you have to think about your ambitions, and just don't think that there are people out there or forces out there that are focusing entirely on how they can stop you getting to where you want to go, because it might just be a question of it just being part of your imagination. And really, there's not much more to say. Just be realistic today, and just focus on what you need to do, and try not to assume a conflict. You could assume a conflict. You could assume that either you succeed or someone else succeeds. You might think that someone doesn't want you to succeed, and because of that, you just could get nervous. But I do think that that's rather unnecessary. Virgo, moon moving into Taurus. That is good, surely. Moon moving into an earth sign, and Virgo is an earth sign, so with a moon moving into Taurus, you are probably going to be more positive, and you're going to start to become aware of possibilities, and you're going to be looking for possibilities. You won't be entirely satisfied with the way things are, and you'll always realize that that things could be better, and that that is certainly challenging, but I do think that it's challenging in a fortunate way. And don't limit yourself. Don't say, "Oh, you don't want to know more stuff. You don't want more information. You don't want different ideas." You always can benefit from different ideas, and it may be that some of your own ideas need to be changed a bit. I don't think they have to be thrown out or anything like that, but a little bit of adjustment could work in your favor. And at the same time, there's no harm in getting some extra focus, because Virgo, you might be trying very hard to make sense of everything, but there is this Mercury semi-square Neptune. So Mercury is 45 degrees from Neptune, and with Mercury being 45 degrees from Neptune, there is some danger that you are distracted, and it could be quite a serious distraction. It may be other people creating the distraction. Someone saying something you really don't want to hear, but you hear it anyway, and you misinterpret it. And it's possible that some people are lying to you, not deliberately lying to you, but they could be deliberately lying to you, but it could happen, and you might take their words at face value, and that could be a problem. And also, you could in certain situations, Virgo, lie to yourself. And why would you lie to yourself? Because it's easiest that way, at least in the short term. If you lie to yourself, that means that existing plans don't have to be disturbed. You can just focus on what you want to focus on, and if anything is disturbing, you can just ignore it. But you have to be realistic, and you can be realistic, because it's not just the fact that we've got Mercury semi-square Neptune, we've also got Mercury decile Saturn. And Mercury, of course, is your ruler, but it's decile Saturn, and Mercury decile Saturn gives us the idea of organization and things being done properly. And you have this idea of being organized, and if you act on this idea and you do whatever you can to create order, then it can really happen. So if you have an idea about how everything should be organized around you, that idea can actually be realized. And from a heliocentric point of view, one aspect that possibly should be mentioned is the fact that we've got Mercury making an opposition to Mars. And Mercury opposition Mars, to my mind, is representative of some of the anger around us in the world in which we live. It doesn't have to be our anger, it's just other people's anger. It's what we're living with. But Virgo, you might kind of pick up on that anger and pick up on that collective energy. And if things aren't exactly right, certain temptation, Virgo, with Mercury opposition Mars, particularly as Pluto is involved, because Mercury has just made a heliocentric conjunction to Pluto, and then it makes the opposition to Mars. Yeah, that could make you annoyed, and it might make you say something that is quite angry and you hadn't really thought it through, and I think that would be unfortunate. So Virgo, do concentrate on yourself. Don't worry too much about what other people may or may not be doing wrong. Make sure that you yourself are properly organized and everything is as how you want it to be, without blaming anyone else. And if you can do that, then today really can be good. And just be aware, Virgo, that you have a lot of transformative power at your disposal. And so you have to decide how you're going to use that transformative power. And that transformative power should be put into really sorting yourself out, without worrying too much about what's going on elsewhere. Transform yourself, make yourself more powerful, more organized, more with it, and more knowledgeable. You may know a lot, but you could know even more. And that's certainly the case. And finally, I should point out that Jupiter is going stationary direct. And Jupiter is ruler of Pisces, which is your opposite sign. So Jupiter could actually represent other people. And so it may be that over the last few months, certain people have been a little bit confused. They've been going here, there, and everywhere, and you haven't really been too sure what to make of them. Especially, if these people are important to you, you're in relationships with them, or what they do has an impact on your well-being and happiness. And with Jupiter going direct, I think that things should become more straightforward and easier to understand. Libra. Venus is changing signs. Venus is moving out of Pisces into Aries, and this is an important sign change. And whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing kind of depends. So, Venus has been in Pisces, which is a sign where Venus does work well. I mean, it's exalted in Pisces. But from a Libran perspective, Pisces is not a great sign. It's a sign that Libra and Pisces don't have a lot of connection with. And so you could say Venus moving into Aries, is more dynamic. I mean, Aries is your opposite sign, and Venus moving into this sign could certainly put a greater focus on relationships and being able to get on with other people. Yet there could be a certain weakness about Venus moving into Aries, over the next couple of weeks. And I mean, I will be looking in, I think tomorrow's video, I'll be looking in greater detail at the Venus cycle, because Venus does a lot of stuff in Aries. I mean, to give you an idea, Venus. I should have prepared better, but to give you an idea, Venus goes into Aries, then Venus starts slowing down, and Venus goes retrograde, and then it goes back into Pisces at the end of March. So there is a lot happening here, and just with Venus moving into Aries, it's perhaps about other people having the power. Because Venus is in your opposite sign, and Venus in Aries is ruled by Mars, and of course Mars rules Aries. So it may be a situation where you have to take into account other people and their influence on you, and relationships have to be treated with a certain amount of caution. So if you're involved with someone, it doesn't matter what the level is, think about what is going on, and what might you be giving away, and how other people might be potentially calling the shots. I mean, you don't want people to be calling the shots. Sometimes it's necessary. Do people mean well? I mean, it could be a case where someone is taking the lead and giving you orders, and they know what they're doing, and they have your best interests at heart, but that's not something you should be taking for granted. So I do think, Libra, that relationships really do need to be treated with a certain amount of caution, and make sure, Libra, that you are not being taken for granted. Yeah, it really is possible. So I had to get that warning out of the way, but at the same time, right now you do have a lot of power. In fact, you are surging with energy at some level, and you're looking for a way to actually use that power and to put it into something productive. And this is because for one thing, Venus is on the Aries point. Regardless of what the sign is, 0 degrees Aries is a point that is super powerful. And so if you concentrate on the right areas, you can really make things happen. But what you don't want to do, Libra, is scatter your energy. Just put your energy into lots of different areas, and you kind of lose touch with what's going on, and that might not be great. So decide what is important, and also decide what is in your best interest. Think about your best interest. I have actually been making this clear that you should be thinking about yourself. With these planets in Aquarius, Mercury is making a trine to Mercury in Aquarius making a trine to Jupiter. In the right environment, you can really achieve wonderful things. You can really put all your energy into making something good happen to yourself. And it would be a shame if that energy got scattered. And it would be a shame if at the last moment you gave something away. And that would perhaps mean giving someone else too much power, too much control. And so, if in doubt, don't trust people. If they've let you down in the past, if they've tried to push you around in the past, then they're going to do it again. So do put yourself first with Venus moving into Aries. Though another way of looking at it is to say, well, Venus is moving into Aries, so be like Aries. Aries is an assertive sign. It's a fire sign. And so if you can be assertive and fiery, but at the same time always taking into account other people's sensibilities, not treading on people's toes, and then that might be the right way to use the energy. So it may actually be a situation where you have choice. So I'm presenting you with some astrological symbols, which in many cases are positive, but there's also a negative side of them. So you take the symbolism you want to take, and rather than thinking, oh, Venus is in Aries, it's in your opposite sign, therefore someone else has control over you, you could say, well, Venus is in Aries, be in Aries, make things happen. But always take into account other people. That is important. And as I said, just at the moment with Mercury trine Jupiter and the Sun almost trine Jupiter, but there is so much that you can accomplish. And yes, Libra, I do think to a great extent it is a matter of choice. Scorpio. Yesterday I said that Mars was square Chiron. Well, Mars is still square Chiron. In fact, Mars is even closer to the square of Chiron than it was yesterday. And so with Mars square Chiron, you do want to do things differently. You don't want to just do what everyone else does. You have your own views, and your own views in their own way are quite unusual and idiosyncratic, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. And every Scorpio really respects their own individuality and puts a high premium on being in control. And it may be the case with Mars square Chiron that you have to remind everyone that you are different. You have a different way of looking at things. But if you appreciate other people's differences, if you appreciate your own differences and why you are special, then you should respect other people in the same way. Because it might be the case that other people do want to do things differently. And you, being a Scorpio, having a fixed view of the world sometimes, might be a bit puzzled and even disturbed by what someone else is doing, and you might be wondering why they're doing it, and you might find it threatening. So if you do see people behaving in a way which is unusual, then you've a right to be suspicious, but don't jump to conclusions. Some people may have, a very good reason for behaving how they are behaving. So so that is important, not to jump to conclusions, and be respectful. And the more mutual respect there is today, then the better for everyone. Especially with the moon being in Taurus. With the moon being in Taurus in your opposite, it's Taurus is the opposite sign to Scorpio. With the moon being in Taurus, that is about other people and accepting other people's individuality, and not being overly concerned, by what people are doing, and in certain cases, being prepared to listen and to accept that another person might know more than you. Yeah, I mean, it is possible. On the other hand, some people are weakening. That is because Venus is moving into Aries, and also maybe because Mars is square Chiron. Mars square Chiron might indicate that as well. Mars square Chiron might, for example, be about you being aware of another person's wound, another person's weakness. But Venus moving into Aries, Venus represents other people, perhaps the important people in your life. And so with Venus moving into Aries, you might find that a sign of another person's weakness is their exaggerated attempts to show how strong they are. Sort of, it may be a question of, the lady, what is it? The lady doth protest too much, methinks. So if people are making a big show of being strong and decisive and in control, that's quite possibly a sign of weakness, because we can tie it to Venus moving into Aries. Venus moving into Aries, another person wanting to assert themselves, but Venus doesn't function very well in this sign. Venus is in its detriment in Aries. So don't be fooled by other people's behavior. And the people who make most noise are the ones who've perhaps got most to be concerned about. And, what do you do? Short term, quite possibly there's nothing you can do. You'd like to say something, you'd like to offer some advice, but it's a situation where I'm not entirely convinced that your advice will be welcome. Perhaps you just instead have to allow things to just play out. And also, you may be tempted over the course of the day, Scorpio, to do something fairly dramatic. It might appear to be the right thing to do, but it probably isn't the right thing to do. If you do something on the spur of the moment with the intention of causing a little bit of a shock, there's some possibility it backfires. And maybe it will backfire because your motives are questioned. And the more you say about yourself, the more you do in a sort of public setting, the more people will question you. And even if they don't question you directly, they may be thinking that your motivations aren't perfect, that you may be acting in a sort of selfish way, or even worse. So that means there is an advantage in holding back. Yeah, especially if you're tempted to do something overly dramatic. Sagittarius, moon moving into Taurus. It's perhaps a time when you want to slow down a little. I mean, that's the nature of Taurus, especially from a Sagittarian perspective. And it may be that just a few things are a little bit chaotic, they're not in the right place, they're disorganized, and with the moon in Taurus, you just have to get your bearings, and you'll be able to do this in a way that is relatively undisturbed. I think people will just, in general, just leave you in peace, and you will be able to just get on with things in your own way. Though you could argue that one of the main things going on today is Jupiter going stationary direct. So Jupiter comes to a standstill. It's been going retrograde, and now it's starting to go forward. It's come to a standstill. And this really is good, because I don't think you've enjoyed Jupiter being retrograde. It may just have felt that you weren't able to move things on very fast, that things were slow, and it was a time when you perhaps had to go back over previous ground, and you were wondering whether you were ever going to make progress. But Jupiter's come to a standstill now, and with Jupiter coming to a standstill, you're ready to start moving forward now, and Jupiter's position is now only going to get better. It will move forward through the sign of Gemini, and with the moon moving forward through Gemini, it may be, for example, that relationships are going to become more satisfying. You may find that other people are more sympathetic to your needs, and there will be just this general sense of movement. And even today, you're feeling a new strength. It's not immediately obvious, as you're trying to work things out. Maybe it's hard work, and you're not really in the mood for doing anything too dramatic. But as the day progresses, you just may feel this new strength. It's coming in, and that means that you really can start to be quite optimistic. But whatever you're doing today, don't listen too much to other people. I mean, people say things, they claim things, they may try to persuade you to do things or think things. Maybe they'll be gaslighting you, but don't listen to what people say, because some people are confused, and indeed some people are actively trying to deceive you. Let me qualify that. I'm not saying people are trying to deceive you. They could be trying to deceive you. And so if anyone makes any claims today, especially if money is involved, I would really just treat that with a pinch of salt. Though Venus is moving into Aries, and that also might say something about other people. Venus moving into Aries is good news, and it does indicate that from the perspective of fun and enjoyment, you can start to enjoy people's company more. Aries is a very creative sign. It's also a fire sign, and with Venus moving into Aries, you are feeling that there is more support, but maybe not today. But Venus is moving into Aries at a time when Jupiter is moving stationary direct, and both events are social events relating to other people. So yeah, short term, Mercury is semi-square Neptune, and there is a danger of deception. But moving beyond today, then you can really start to enjoy people's company, and people are going to be more positive and more exciting. And that is something to look forward to, over the next few weeks. Capricorn. you have a huge amount of energy at your disposal at the moment. It is a high energy time for Capricorns, and especially as the moon is now moving from Aries into Taurus, with the moon moving into Taurus, you're starting to feel more confident. Okay, the moon might not move into Taurus until late in the day if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but if you're in the Americas or Europe, it's pretty much a moon. In Africa, it's pretty much a moon in Taurus day. But with the moon moving into Taurus, at the same time as you having this sort of blast of energy and dynamism, you can really change things and get attention. If attention is what you need, I think people are going to listen to you if you want to make a noise. But you may feel, Capricorn, that you don't actually have to make a noise, that you can just be yourself, do what's important, and that should be fine. And also you understand the importance of stability in a really sort of fundamental way. And that's especially the case if you are working, if you have a job or a business. It does seem that there's so much that you can do at home, and you don't actually have to be anywhere. You don't have to go anywhere. At least you shouldn't have to go anywhere. I know that people are returning to the office, or being forced to return to the office, not just in America, but in the UK as well. But home is where your entrepreneurial skills are best. It's where you have a good understanding of how to make money, how to be successful, how, if you have a job, how your company can be successful. Home is where you can really concentrate. And so, if possible, don't allow yourself to be pushed into the limelight, because when you're in the limelight, when you're right in the center of things, I'm not convinced that you will actually be on best form. So, if possible, Capricorn, really do try to stand up for yourself, and also stand up for what you believe in, and consider what you are good at. And because there are things that you might be sort of good at that someone else can do. So if someone else can do something better than you, why do it yourself? Do the things which you are really good at, the things that you have a superlative skill at. So do try to concentrate on that. And don't be in too much of a hurry. You could be in a little bit of a hurry, and that would be unnecessary and could be dangerous as well. Jupiter is going stationary direct, and in general, I think Jupiter going stationary direct is a good thing. But in your case, Jupiter going stationary direct might just encourage you to overdo something over the next couple of days, and that might make you vulnerable to some kind of minor injury. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen at all. I'm just looking at things from all possibilities, considering what could go wrong. So, don't be in a hurry. Watch where you step. Don't allow other people to force the pace, and don't force the pace yourself too much because of that vulnerability. This vulnerability is not going to last very long. So I don't want you to worry about it, but it's always good to be cautious, isn't it? Especially if you're a Capricorn. Aquarius, Mercury is actually still making a trine to Jupiter. So we had this Mercury trine Jupiter yesterday, and it's not exact anymore, but it's still very much there. And with this Mercury trine Jupiter, you have a very good sense of what you can do, and you're very good at expressing it. Your mind is on great form, and there are lots of things you can say, and I don't think you're going to be lost for words. In fact, compared to yesterday, you're going to find it easier to be precise. So maybe yesterday, the words and the ideas were all there, but the question is, could you articulate yourself in a way that was really logical, that people really could understand? And today, I think you can. I mean, you probably could yesterday, but I think today more so. And it may be that today, Aquarius, you have a much better sense of detail, and perhaps the details were ignored yesterday, but today you can concentrate on the details that matter. And I think that in most cases, the things you say will make a lot of sense. And if you want to be really effective, Aquarius, it's important that you stick to home ground. If you go somewhere unfamiliar, where you don't understand the rules, you're not going to be on best form. So it's best that you stick to what you know and trust, and perhaps even stick to people who you know and trust, because in that way you'll be able to sort of present yourself in the best way. Yes. And we also have Venus moving into Aries. So this is quite a big event, Venus moving into Aries. Venus is moving into a fire sign, and this Venus moving into Aries does give you a boost in terms of what you say. And words, it's not just about words, is it? I mean, I've talked about words and how at the moment you do seem to have a way with words. But words on their own can have a certain lack of power, because they don't have the force, they don't have the dynamic energy behind them, and that might have been something you've been looking for. And I think that with the Venus moving into Aries, you can start to find this dynamism, and so that makes you even more appealing, and so people really are going to listen to you. But should you listen to them? I'm not actually convinced. I mean, it's always nice to listen to other people, but if you really listen to what people are saying and what people are worried about, it might not make much sense to you, because some people do seem to be worried. They have all sorts of fears which, if you really listen to them, may actually verge on the paranoid. Now, I'm not making any comment about anyone's mental health, but there is a sense of paranoia and a feeling that things are really bad, that there are things happening under the surface we really have to watch out for. Remember, I'm not talking about you being paranoid. I'm talking about other people being paranoid. It's the environment in which you're living in. And so do be aware of that. And what you mustn't do is feed other people's fears. Your job is, if you hear people getting worried about things, is to help people to relax, help people to understand that they are, in most cases, worrying about nothing. And you may be helped by Jupiter going stationary direct. Jupiter's going stationary direct. It comes to a standstill in Gemini. And Gemini is a sign in the Aquarian chart which is sort of positive, enthusiastic, and creative. And that might help you to present people with an alternative vision, a vision of positivity and creativity. And also, once you start to ground yourself, and then you start to ground other people, they may realize that many of their fears are just meaningless. Pisces, Jupiter is going stationary direct. I mean, it comes to a standstill today. And with Jupiter coming to a standstill, that is likely to have an impact on you. I mean, Jupiter rules Pisces, so Jupiter is your ruler. And so it may feel as if a period of a few months where things maybe weren't moving as fast as you'd like them to is finally coming to an end. And there may be a sense of relief, but also a sense of hope with Jupiter going stationary direct, that finally things are starting to move. And very often Jupiter going stationary direct, it may be like the darkest hour. Right now there may be things that you don't feel very happy about, and you're wondering how things can possibly move. But with Jupiter going stationary direct, this is the start. And remember, Jupiter goes forward through Gemini, and in June Jupiter moves into Cancer, and that's, for Pisces, that's something really to look forward to, because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So in June, your ruler will be in Cancer, in a very fortunate sector of your chart, and that is something that you really should be starting to concentrate on. But don't jump ahead of yourself. Right now, things are getting better, and I think that with Jupiter going stationary direct, perhaps the focus should be on your own home, making sure things at home are all in order and everything is properly sorted out, and you're feeling comfortable. I mean, that's what matters. And it just may be that over the last few months you weren't feeling entirely comfortable. There was always something missing, something that had to be done, something that had to be fixed. But with Jupiter moving direct, it's good. And Mercury is also making a trine to Jupiter. That Mercury trine Jupiter was exact yesterday, but it's still there. And so Mercury trine Jupiter is about you feeling good about yourself, positive thoughts, and also getting positive thoughts on other people, because Mercury trine Jupiter can be about relationships. And so it's a time for you and those close to you to be perhaps talking about things, having another look at old problems. And when you look at an old problem in another way and from another angle, you might actually realize that you are worrying about nothing. And you might, at some stage in the day, just feel a sense that you just know what you're supposed to be doing, what you want to do. And once you've decided, Pisces, that there is something you really want to do, then it's a time when you can really throw everything you've got into doing it with pinpoint precision. In fact, it has to be with pinpoint precision. It's about deciding that something is important. You want to give it your all, and you give it your all, and things move quickly, and things move quickly in your favor. So Pisces, things are getting better. Jupiter's going direct, and there's a lot to look forward to. And now I want to look at things from a viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 20, which is contemplation. This is, in a way, a very low-profile hexagram. It's about doing not a great deal. The I Ching tells us that we've made the ablution, we've washed ourselves, but we're not ready to make the sacrifice. We've not taken the initiative, and so we're in that sort of intermediate phase where we're kind of ready to do something, but we haven't gone through with it because we recognize that we haven't necessarily got all the facts, that we need to think things through. And so it is a time for observing. And that's often seen as being very positive, isn't it? When you're observing, it's always a good thing to observe. Don't take action, all the risks of taking action. We observe and we think about it. And it makes me think about myself and over my life. I spent a long time thinking, and I'm thinking about things in a very, very serious way. And I will go for walks and I will spend an hour thinking about things, and I'm very pleased with myself, and I think I'm being very serious, and maybe I'll act on it and nothing will happen. Or even worse, it will be a complete mistake. You know that feeling. You really work it through in your head and you think you're being serious and you get it completely wrong, and your perceptions are completely wrong. And that is perhaps a problem with contemplation. Contemplation isn't as good as it's cut out to be. And that is certainly the message with the first line of this hexagram, because the bottom line moves. And it is about contemplation, but it's just saying we simply don't have all the facts. We have a very, very limited view. And it talks about... the I Ching talks about the boy observing. And why does it talk about the boy? It's talking about someone who is inexperienced, someone who is youthful and is making the mistakes of youth. They think they can see everything and they can't see everything. And their vision is so much more limited than they think it is. It's like, I don't know, I'm never really, very good at... driving. Passing my driving test was a complete nightmare. And of course, one of the basic skills of learning to drive is to look in the mirror. And you can make a big effort to look in the mirror and you can see all sorts of things in the mirror. But that doesn't mean you know what's going on. What do they say? Something like you watch, but you don't see in the mirror. And I think that's a sort of mistake that people make when they're learning to drive. And it's a bit like that. You see everything in the mirror, but you don't know what it means. and it's almost as good as useless. And so just because you watch things and you think you're understanding something doesn't mean anything. You might be just getting such a limited view that you really don't know what's going on. So contemplation is not always a good place to be, particularly if you're reaching the wrong conclusions based on limited information. So that's the first line moving. Bottom line moves. But the fifth line moves as well. And this is rather different. It is a much better line. And it's indicating that we are understanding what's going on. So it may be a case when we start looking at something and trying to make sense of it, to begin with, we make no sense of it at all. Whatever we see, we may even be confident that we're making sense of it. We don't get it. We just have to wait. Wait until we start to realize that our first impressions were wrong, and then keep observing. And also observe oneself. That is very important. And to be self-critical. And the I Ching tells us that if we are really in a strong position, if we're really strong, we can deal with criticism. And it's perhaps also about other people observing us. And people observe us, and maybe they make comments. They say, you've got something wrong. And if we're strongly placed, we don't mind. If we're weakly placed, then of course we might take offense. So we have to keep observing. We have to keep going, because those first impressions are not going to tell us very much. We have to continue. And then this hexagram contemplation, it does move, because we've got two moving lines. It moves to a second hexagram, which is hexagram number 27, which is the corners of the mouth. And this is a hexagram we've had quite recently. And in a way, this hexagram is about observation as well. It's about closely observing other people and asking ourselves, what motivates them? what really inspires them. Because if you know what motivates someone, if you really know what inspires someone, in other words, if you know what they eat or what they like to eat, then you're in a better position to make a decision about them. And the corners of a mouth also indicate that, having made our observations in the previous hexagram, we've got quite a lot to deal with. And the corners of a mouth is about can be about bulging cheeks. In other words, we've taken on a lot, and we need to digest what we've observed. So once we start making that first conclusion, well, not our first conclusion, looking at the previous hexagram, our first conclusions are wrong, or just so limited as to be almost useless. And then the fifth line from the bottom is about really starting to make sense of things. So, we've got a lot to take on board, and then we just have to wait and we have to absorb it. And there is this idea that it is not a time for action, because with the corners of the mouth, if you look at the nuclear hexagram, i.e. if you take off the top and the bottom lines, you see you just have those 4 lines in the middle which are just all broken. And that takes us to hexagram number 2, which is a receptive. So it is receptive, the corners of the mouth. It's not about taking on anything new. It is about observing, and it's about finishing what's on our plate, not going in for second helpings. That's definitely not what we should be doing. And if we're patient, we can find out so much about the world and about other people, what motivates other people, and whether or not we can trust other people. And that moment of silence, of contemplation, it is fitting when astrologically we've got Jupiter going stationary direct. That is a moment of silence, when Jupiter doesn't move. And it is a time of contemplation, and we can really start to really understand things. And it's just important not to take on too much and digest what we've got in front of us. And now I want to talk about Jupiter and other stuff, and I want to have a go at trying to work out what's going on economically. I mean, don't believe anything I say. Remember, this is for entertainment purposes only. We have tariffs and Canada, and I'm probably going to be a bit disjointed in terms of what I say. Now, I've talked about the economic cycle quite a lot in a general sense, and if you remember from previous videos, I've very much got into the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, that Jupiter and Saturn are important planets in terms of understanding the economy, because Jupiter is a planet of expansion, of growth, and Saturn is the planet of restriction, of recession, and for example, increasing interest rates is a very Saturnine thing to do, because it reduces people's ability to spend money, to borrow money. And whereas reducing interest rates, having easier money, quantitative easing as well, that's quite Jupiterian. So quantitative tightening, Saturn, quantitative easing, Jupiter, Saturn, the chronocrators, the rulers of time. And so we have to monitor Jupiter and Saturn closely. And turning to the actual chart of Jupiter going stationary direct, here it is. So this is the moment Jupiter goes stationary direct. And it goes stationary direct at 9:40 a.m. and it is at 11:17 degrees Gemini. You see, it's still got an R, but that R is about to disappear. And Jupiter, when Jupiter goes stationary direct, it means, Jupiter has been going retrograde. So Jupiter moving retrograde represents a weakness. And because, Jupiter's in Gemini retrograde. And it loses points because it's retrograde. When it goes direct, it gains strength. The planet becomes stronger. Okay, from a weak position, but it is getting stronger. And you could say that Jupiter going direct, stationary direct, when it comes to an apparent standstill from a viewpoint of the Earth, of course, heliocentrically Jupiter never goes retrograde, that there is going to be a certain sense of improvement. And if we look at the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, there was this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2000, at the end of 2000, and the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, very important for the global economy. And generally, that first square may be a moment of crisis, but it often ends up being positive. And as I've said on several occasions, I do not believe that over the next couple of years we're going to see global recession, chaos, breakdown, or whatever. I think that's more about the Jupiter-Saturn opposition, which is not until 2020, 2020, 2029 and 2030. So I know a lot of people are saying everything is going to collapse, but I don't think everything is going to collapse. But I understand that things are difficult at the moment. And so there is Jupiter-Saturn in square, with Jupiter being very weak. Okay, it does actually have term. There's a minor dignity term, but Jupiter is still pretty weak. But now it's direct. And so things may be starting to improve from now on. And of course, Jupiter will move into Cancer in June. And so I think that is something to perhaps look forward to. So I'm not convinced that, however bad things now, I looked on the internet, I looked at the news. I'm recording this on Monday morning, and I looked at, all the stock futures were down. It all looked pretty grim with the tariffs, and so that's what we're coming into. But yeah, Jupiter is about to move direct. So that is the geocentric picture. And going back to the heliocentric picture, I do think that the heliocentric chart does tell us, say a lot about what is happening at the moment, because heliocentrically, we had this Jupiter-Saturn square quite recently. I think it was last week we had Jupiter-Saturn square. There is Jupiter, heliocentric Jupiter at 2122 Gemini, and Saturn at 2055 Pisces. So they are in square with one another. And so heliocentrically, that is a really important point of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And while we've got this aspect, we've also got Mars opposition Pluto, Mars opposition Mercury. So, over the weekend, as you've had, you had Donald Trump announcing tariffs on Canada, and you've got the president of Mexico countering that, and you've got Canada announcing tariffs on the United States, and you had Chrystia Freeland suggesting that they have 100%. She's the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister, suggesting that you have 100% tariffs on Elon's Teslas. So that is all Mercury opposition Mars, and then I think that this does kind of illustrate what I was saying about the heliocentric positions of the planets. So heliocentric is about the collective. Politicians are going to be influenced by this. It's all about posturing and words, and so you've got this Mars opposition Pluto, Mars opposition Mercury. Now, Mars is interesting here, and Mercury is interesting as well, because if you look at the Jupiter-Saturn square, so you will see that the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint is at about 6 degrees 10, something like that. The Jupiter-Saturn midpoint is at around 6 Taurus, and Mars is starting to move. Mars is at 5 Taurus, Mars is at 5 Leo. So Mars is starting to move to the square of the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, and Mercury is also moving to a square of its Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. And that seems to describe what's going on perfectly. Jupiter-Saturn, the economic cycle, Mars, Pluto, Mercury, posturing. And that's really what it is all about. And so it may be in a few days' time, as that aspect starts to finally break up, particularly that Mars, Mercury opposition Mars, Mercury conjunct Pluto, things will get easier. This is just a reminder. This is important. Why it's important to look at the positions of the planets heliocentrically. And you might think, oh, I haven't got a computer program to do it. Well, if you go to astro.com and you look at the ephemeris section, you can download PDFs of the heliocentric positions of the planets. Okay, it's not the same as having a computer program, but if you want to get a feel for the heliocentric positions of planets, it is available on astro.com on their ephemeris section. So that's the heliocentric chart. And then we have to consider Jupiter going direct and why it's causing so many problems right now. And I mean, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? I've talked about the United States and conflict. And if you look at the United States' chart, conflicts don't have to be about physical war, dropping bombs on each other. It can be an economic conflict. And here is the United States' chart. And the United States has 1221, has its descendant at 1221 Gemini. I mean, who knows whether whether we really should be taking 5:10 p.m. on July the 4th, 1776 as the United States' chart. But in my experience and other astrologers' experience, this 5:10 p.m. time does seem to work pretty well. So if you compare the United States' chart with with Jupiter going stationary direct. So if we put one on the other, and so there is Jupiter stationary direct 1117 Gemini right on United States' descendant, just a degree off. And I think that's good enough. And so it's kind of not surprising that the United States is now getting itself into some kind of a trade war. Or I think it could get involved in other wars. We don't know what's going to happen. As I've said, I'm not convinced that Trump is going to be able to stay out of wars. However hard he tries, I think there's plenty of potential for getting involved in conflict, whether it's the Middle East or Ukraine or perhaps somewhere else. And so that's something that we do need to worry about. But still, that fits. Jupiter going stationary direct, right on United States' descendant is when things are really flaring up. And then you've got Canada's chart, and so here's Canada's chart, and in the case of Canada, the issues with Canada, because with Canada, Trump seems to be having a little bit of a campaign against Canada. I mean, okay, people made a little bit wary about. Hold on, I also want to look at another chart in a moment, but let's just hold on. Let me do this chart. So he's now suggesting if the best thing for Canada is, of course, if it were to join the United States. I mean, that's what Trump says. I mean, that's an incredible thing to say. I believe 13% of Canadians want to become part of the United States, so it's not a particularly popular thing to want to do. I don't think the Canadians are going to go with that idea, but still, here is the Canadian chart. And assuming I've got this right, just as when it got Dominion status in 1867, and I've gone for midnight, July the 1st. And I've set this for Ottawa, and Ottawa is important, and for other reasons as well. I'll be coming on to that. But Ottawa, so set for Ottawa, and one feature of Canada's chart is that it's got a Sun-Uranus conjunction exactly on the IC, and here's its midheaven. That's true black moon Lilith on the midheaven. I'm not quite sure what that true black moon Lilith means, but so midheaven, Uranus, and the Sun, all configured. Now let's look at Uranus going stationary direct, and so if you look at Uranus going stationary direct. This is not Jupiter, because it's Uranus going stationary direct. So Uranus went stationary direct on January the 30th at 2316 Taurus. Now, this is another reason why you absolutely must use semi-squares and sesquiquadrates in your astrological work. I mean, I'm sorry to be dogmatic about it. You must use these aspects. These aspects work really well. They work better than trines and sextiles. Certainly for this kind of astrology. Okay, not in horary astrology, I don't use semi-squares and sesquiquadrates, but you must use them. Sorry to be dogmatic about that, but here is Canada's midheaven, 804 Capricorn. So in other words, Uranus is exactly sesquiquadrate Canada's midheaven, and there is the Sun-Uranus conjunction at 8:36, Uranus at 8:36, Sun 8:51, and so Jupiter is smashing, it's making the semi-square to the Sun-Uranus conjunction. So you can see that Uranus is really stirring things up for Canada, and it's, I suppose you've also got Trudeau, which is as a supposedly lame duck prime minister. He's still prime minister, isn't he, I think? But maybe he's trying to use this crisis for his own reasons. It's a good opportunity for the Canadians to rally around their glorious leader, isn't it? I don't know. And so you can see that Canada is under a lot of pressure at the moment. And while all this was happening, over the weekend, we had Mercury trine Jupiter. So Monday we had Mercury building up to Mercury trine Jupiter. Monday, Mercury trine is exact. And so that's all these words. You think that Mercury Jupiter is this kind of fortunate aspect. Maybe it is fortunate, but it's all about these words and on a sort of diplomatic and global level. And it's interesting that this Mercury Jupiter trine seems to relate back to an earlier way of looking at things. Why is the United States having all these problems? Why does it want to have tariffs? And it just may be the reality of the fact that when your currency is the global currency, is the global reserve currency, that does put you under a lot of pressure, because you are the reserve currency, and that often means that your currency becomes stronger than it actually should be. And of course, if you've got a strong currency, that means it's cheaper to import, and your exports become expensive. So in terms of a trade, when you have a strong currency, that kind of encourages a trade deficit. And maybe this is a problem with empire, and America, trying to deal with this trade deficit, which is what Trump is doing. You could blame Trump, but maybe this is just something that would be happening anyway. If Trump wasn't born, he'd have to be born. So that's just the way he is. And it just may be a sort of crisis of empire. And this is what we're seeing. And it may be about the long-term decline of America, which, to be honest, if you look at how bad the world is, you could say that America is one of the best, is the very best of a bad bunch, you could say. I'm pretty critical about America in these videos, but where is better than America? In a real sense, it's difficult to find somewhere that is better than America. You might want to live in Singapore, but I don't know, that seems a bit too structured and ordered for my liking. So everywhere has got its problems, and so with the United States, having this issue. It's happened before. The reserve currency used to be the British pound, and Britain had the same problems of having its reserve currency as the British pound. And there was this thing called Imperial Preference in 1932, when Britain, as the imperial power, as the world's number one power, but heavily on a decline, was trying to bring about some kind of tariffs. And the idea of imperial preference is you give preference to the empire, and countries like Canada, even Ireland was part of a conference. And there was a conference in Ottawa which started on July the 21st, 1932, and it ended a month later. It was a pretty long conference. And what's interesting about this is that you had a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction at the start of the conference, fairly close to Regulus, certainly within 5 degrees of Regulus, Empire, Regulus, and so that was when you started this conference. The conference ended, and it was in Ottawa, and it's all about Ottawa is coming up again, and so here is the end of the conference a month later. I don't know what time it ended, and I don't know what time it began, but there you can see still there's Mercury not making a conjunction to Jupiter anymore, but that idea of Mercury-Jupiter, then maybe there is some kind of link between Mercury-Jupiter and tariffs, and that is something that's interesting. So it has been done before with the imperial preference, and it's possibly is a sign of the decline of empire, the decline of the dollar as a reserve currency. You could say that it's sort of the beginning of the end, that a country like America is actually starting to see the problems of having the dollar as a reserve currency, because it does lead to deficits, and it does actually have an impact on American jobs. If the dollar was weaker, things might be a bit easier. But I'm not an economist. I don't know. I was never very good at economics when I was trying to study it, but correct me if I've got things completely wrong. And broadly speaking, what I think about this current crisis, given the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, given the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, people are very worried about tariffs. Tariffs were a feature of the Great Recession in the early 1930s. Or it started in 1929. I do think this is the wrong stage of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle to be thinking about a complete collapse. And I think that over the next few months, as Jupiter gathers strength, as we move towards that Jupiter-Saturn square in June, I think that things are going to improve. I still think that next 4 years, maybe this is a hiccup, but I do think the next 4 years we're not going to see a big bust, at least in terms of anything that affects the US. And I wanted to finish by considering just a couple of people who might be impacted by Jupiter going stationary direct. And one of them is Tucker Carlson. I don't know much about Tucker Carlson. I don't know what he's doing, but he has got his Mercury at 11:58 Gemini. So Tucker Carlson will have Jupiter exactly going stationary direct on his Mercury. And I don't know what his plans are, but I would have thought that was logically quite fortunate. I mean, he's got a strong Mercury in Gemini. Mercury stations on Jupiter conjunct his Mercury, so I'm sure that he'll have even more to say for himself than he usually has. And another journalist who has Jupiter going stationary direct hitting him is Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan, I don't have a time of birth for Piers Morgan, but Piers Morgan was born with Mars conjunct Uranus opposition Saturn. And that is quite extreme. I mean, obviously, the intensity of that Mars conjunct Uranus conjunct opposition Saturn, he puts it into his journalism. You know, Mars-Saturn opposition is quite dangerous, actually. I mean, there seems to be a lot of sort of frustration now, but it's anger, and I suppose that's why he's such a successful journalist. Whatever you think of him, I know a lot of people don't like him, but you can't take away from him the fact that he's very successful. And so this Jupiter goes stationary direct on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, on his Saturn-Uranus midpoint. I would be slightly worried about that. I don't know what Piers Morgan is up to, whether he's going to have problems, whether he's going to be attacked, maybe legally, verbally, physically. I think, yeah, over the next couple of days, Piers Morgan needs to watch out a little bit. I think that there is a certain amount of pressure there. You know, Jupiter's doesn't always have a good influence. It can be quite stressful. And then we have Camilla as in Queen Camilla. So she has Mars at 11 degrees Gemini. Now, that Mars might say something about the men in her life. It might say something about the King Charles. And so she does have Jupiter stationing on her Mars. Again, I wouldn't necessarily see this as being a positive. And in fact, if we actually look at the chart if we look at it in detail with Camilla and Jupiter stationing, Jupiter stations at where's Jupiter? Let me find. Jupiter stations at 1117 Gemini. Camilla's Mars is at 1117 Gemini. So Mars is stationing exactly on Jupiter's stationing exactly on Camilla's Mars. So I do think that, something might be going on. I would not see this as being fortunate somehow. I mean, it might be. I mean, I don't know what she's doing, but there's a lot of power, a lot of energy trying to get out with Camilla. I don't know what she's doing. It may be concerns she has, worries she has. Maybe she's accident prone. I don't know. But I'm not convinced that this kind of Jupiter transit is necessarily going to be fortunate. Nigel Farage has his ascendant at 1127 Virgo, and he's got Pluto rising, and he's actually got Black Moon Lilith square his ascendant. So Jupiter is currently in a very high profile part of his chart, in his 10th square his ascendant. This puts Farage under a lot of pressure. He may be able to use this to his advantage. You could say Jupiter square his Pluto, square his ascendant. It does have a Jupiter on a midheaven feel to it, being square the ascendant. And so Nigel Farage, I think, could be influenced by this. And Mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, she has Venus-Mars conjunction at 11 Virgo, square Jupiter. Tempted to take things too far. Tempted to really push that Venus-Mars. I mean, that Venus-Mars conjunction in Virgo in the first house is very charismatic. Perhaps that explains how she's gone so far in terms of local politics, but she does have Jupiter on hitting her Mars. So is it going to boost her charisma, or is it just going to make things more difficult for her? I don't know. And finally, the United States' new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth has his descendant at 1147 Gemini. So like America, you know, Pete Hegseth's ascendant is in the same place as United States' ascendant. So when Jupiter hits his descendant, it also hits America's descendant. So with Jupiter on his descendant, well, it could just be that Jupiter stationary direct is just reminding us that he's just new to the job. because he's been feeling this anyway. But Jupiter on a descendant, all the stuff he has to deal with. He has to deal with America's enemies and war and so forth. So could be maybe there's some conflict or some action he's required to make as Secretary of Defense. I mean, I know he had to make this announcement with the crash, Washington DC crash with the helicopter, because obviously that helicopter was a military helicopter. So that might be how it worked. Jupiter was starting to go stationary, and maybe he's already had the aspect, he's already had the event, but still there could be more things going on. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say about Jupiter going stationary direct. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.